should be scared or what? Oh wow. Oh wow. If this isn't about crazy, he probably ain't even gonna join for real. Y'all tell you my friend be doing me so wrong. So wrong. Y'all. It's compensation. Oh my god. I think I should watch scary videos, right? I think I should watch something scary, something interesting. Yeah, that's what we gonna do. Fuck. Okay, see, bitch, I don't remember seeing this video ever. When the fuck did this come out? Whatever. Oh. YouTube, please don't cancel me. I'm showing the whole channel.
Hey friends, the holiday season has rolled around. The holiday season has rolled around. The holiday season has rolled around.
Oh.
Once again, and I'm willing to bet that some of us are going to struggle when it comes to gift ideas. That's why this episode is sponsored by our good friends over at Raycon. Raycon's wireless earbuds, headphones, and speakers are certain to make a practical and thoughtful gift for just about anyone in your life.
Oh.
And at half the price of other premium audio brands, they're much easier on your wallet. They offer phenomenal audio quality with up to 54 hours of battery life and boast a ton of handy features. Their earbuds also fit snugly and comfortably in your ear, which make them perfect for those long holiday journeys home that some of us have to make. And a small but powerful wireless speaker is sure to help liven up any family gathering.
Please.
Personally, I use my wireless earbuds when I go out running, so trust me when I say that any fitness enthusiast in your life will hugely appreciate a pair, even if they even bring an emergency backup for their current favorites. For the next month, Raycon's website will be hosting a very special countdown to Christmas with daily deals and specials for you to take advantage of. You can always pick up a pair of Raycons in stores like Kohl's or Walmart, but if you head over to buyraycon.com/letsreadyt, you can get 15% off site-wide with the code HOLIDAY. Purchasing through the Raycon website also offers free shipping, free returns within 30 days, and buy now, pay later options to make handling the holiday finances that much easier. So, to make the most stressful parts of the holiday just a little easier for everyone. Click the link in the description box below or go to buyraycon.com/letsreadyt to get 15% off your gifts for friends or family. I'm a 20-year-old male living in a small town in Texas. My family is below or just on the poverty line for most of my life. Things were slightly better while my dad was around to help, but he had a bad habit of getting put in jail. He would go on to leave permanently when I was about 12. My mom was left alone to raise 2 kids. My mom's mom would often babysit us during the summers until we got old enough to take care of ourselves. Now for me, that was 15.
15?
My sister was a few years older and was already working, and as soon as I could, I got a job too. I stayed busy between school and work, but managed to graduate with pretty good grades. I toyed with the idea of going to college, but I felt a debt to my mother for keeping us fed and sheltered and all that good stuff, and I chose to forego school for a few years so I could pay back my mom for all her hard work. Since graduating, I've been able to work more hours. I put this so-called extra money into finding us a bigger apartment. Sharing a 2-bedroom with 2 other people was less than ideal. Although selfish on my part, we have a place where we could all have our own bedrooms. I've been sleeping on the couch for at least 3 years, but was able to sleep on my sister's bed on the nights that she was with her boyfriend.
Ew.
As a whole, things could have been a lot worse. At one time, we were all crammed into one bedroom. My mother and sister had to share a room. This was a source of constant friction between them. I didn't mind sacrificing my own wants over the needs of my own mother and sister, and I discovered how important it is for women to have their own spaces. Sleeping in the living room was a small thing when compared to the chaos that I had to endure before. My search lasted for almost a month, but I was fortunate to find a place just in time. The complex was a bit drab, and the apartment was somewhat outdated, but it met all our needs. We got all our stuff packed up and moved with 24 hours to spare. Almost immediately, problems began to crop up, many of them small. The faucets had low pressure and the toilet was constantly clogged. We got used to these types of things, but the bigger ones, like the neighbors, were a different story. As an example, the people we shared a wall with made noise 24 hours a day. Their children spent a large amount of time on their own. Kids as young as 4 often came to our door asking for food. When the adults were around, they would sometimes lock the children outside by themselves. When this happened, the kids would run around yelling and throwing trash everywhere. I don't really blame the kids, but it didn't make the situation any less annoying. Probably the biggest of the problems involved someone called Marcel. He lived in an apartment across from us and spent much of his time outside in a cheap plastic lawn chair smoking. Smoking wasn't Marcel's only vice, though. He also loved little women, especially blonde ones. Unfortunately for my sister, she met both of those parameters. Almost from the day he first saw her, Marcel was constantly harassing her. She tried taking it in stride. He wasn't aggressive, just overly flirtatious.
Right.
His behavior amounted to little more than catcalls and whistles.
Ew.
It was nothing my sister hadn't experienced before. Things stayed this way for a while, but then she began bringing other guys around, and Marcel got very upset by this new development. They started calling her a tease. She tried to do as she always had and just ignore it, but Marcel wouldn't let things rest. One night in particular, my sister was talking to her then-boyfriend in the parking lot, and Marcel started a fight with the guy. Fortunately, nothing really came of it. The guy got in his car and left. It set a scary precedent nonetheless.
Oh, hell.
And from there on, my sister avoided Marcel like the plague.
Hell yeah, baby.
He would ask me about her, but I just played dumb. It was beginning to look as if things were going to quietly blow over. But then the power went out, and Marcel pounced. It's been 2 weeks since it happened. My sister and I were home preparing dinner when the power went off. I took a quick walk around the complex and realized it was limited to the community. All the streetlights and stop signals were still working fine, and my next step was calling the power company. This was when I discovered the horrible truth. After almost an hour on the phone, I was told the company that owned the complex hadn't paid the bill for almost 4 months. All the bills are supposed to be covered by them. Therefore, we were left powerless to do anything.
Oh shit.
I called Mom and filled her in on our problem. We discussed it and decided to grab a motel for a few days until it could be resolved. I let my sister know and we began packing. We were in the process of bringing our bags to the car when it happened. I was inside and my sister was outside. I heard her screaming for help, and I could tell it was my sister. I ran outside and I saw Marcel trying to hold her down. He was attempting to wrap duct tape around her mouth and control her at the same time. My sister was fighting like a wild cat, but Marcel was just too strong for her. He was too busy wrestling with her to notice me approaching. I ran up and soccer kicked him across the face as hard as I could. He was flung onto his back, and I stood over him while my sister ran for the car. He was clearly unconscious. I suppose he could have been dead, but I didn't really care in that moment. Once I was sure he was no longer a threat, I hopped into the car and we drove straight to the nearest police station. My sister still had duct tape in her hair when we approached the desk. We told our story and they promised to check it out. The cops took some pictures of my sister's cuts and bruises. They suggested we go to the hospital, but we didn't see it as necessary. Instead, we found a motel and got us some rooms. And a few hours passed and we got a call from the police updating us. They had questioned Marcel about the attack, and he tried to deny it ever happened. The problem was that he had a massive mark across his face from where I kicked him, and he was asked about it but couldn't come up with a satisfactory answer. As a result, they decided to arrest him, and to my knowledge, he's still there right now. We had waited to tell Mom until she left work. She was upset, as you would expect, but relieved that Marcel was finally being punished. Another unexpected side effect occurred as a result of our problem with Marcel. Some of the tenants of our complex used the arrival of the police as an opportunity to air some of their grievances with the apartment management. For a lot of people, the power outage was just another symptom of the company's terrible treatment of its tenants. I've already mentioned our problems, but it seems we may have been the lucky ones. Some of the people living in the lower-lying areas have been suffering from multiple instances of flooding. The rain would pool in their porches between the buildings and flow into their patio doors and flood their apartments. And it didn't stop there, though. The sewer lines would occasionally back up and residents would have sewage flood into their apartments. And this happened to several people just while we were there. It was all too much to ignore, even for the cops. They contacted the proper people at the city and they came to look around. By the end of the same day, the complex was deemed a health hazard and the residents were all moved out. Some went to stay with friends and family, but most have ended up in motels like us. As things stand now, we're in a motel, but I have found us another place in a better area, and we'll be moving in this coming week. On the downside, it's only a 2-bedroom. I'll be back on the couch for 6 months, but it's better than our present predicament. Even if the closing of the complex hadn't happened, there was no way we were going back there. It was nothing but trouble from the start, and a lot of our neighbors were lowlifes. The final straw would have been Marcel living just yards from us after what we'd done, and right now it's still too early to say what's going to happen with him legally. I've been assured that he will receive some amount of prison time, and I hope it's a long time.
Me too, bitch.
And that's about it for me. If there's any major news, I may update this post, but for the time being, we all just wanted to move on. I do dream that one day I'm successful enough to get a nice little house for my mom. She hasn't lived in one since she was a kid, and I think it would be the perfect gift. She has sacrificed so much to keep us together and safe, and it would surely give my sister and I comfort to know that she's taken care of after we had moved on to start our own families. Until then, I'm going to focus on the road ahead and do my best. And thank you all for listening.
You're welcome, bitch. The four chesters.
My childhood was a long and difficult one. Both my parents were alcoholics and drug addicts well into my 30s. I'm going to be vague about my hometown. The name doesn't matter anyway. Just another dead-end suburb nestled on the outskirts of a much larger festering dump of crime and good days long past. I witnessed countless numbers of overdoses and domestic battery. Neither parent was capable of holding down anything more than low-paying part-time employment. Even then, none lasted very long. I was little more than a burden, often going several days without any substantial food. I was regularly sent to school in dirty, threadbare clothes, and as you can imagine, the other kids mocked me relentlessly.
Tell her to shut the hell up.
Remember the stinky kid at your school everyone laughed at?
Yes,
Well,
you.
that was me at mine.
Mm-hmm.
All the adults around me saw how I was being treated, but maybe 2 teachers I can recall doing anything for me. I believe I had done something to deserve it, and it took a long time for me to shake that feeling. And now that I've told you all of this, I want to make something clear. I don't include it to gain your sympathy. It only serves to explain why I found myself in the coming situation and what incidents drove me to that point.
Right.
Don't feel sorry for me.
I've
gone on to make a great life for myself. I've got a beautiful family, including a wonderful wife and 3 happy children. I've achieved everything I dreamed of one day having, and all before the age of 50. My life is a success story that I wish more people could achieve. But enough about me, though. You're here for the real story. Now, by my early teens, I was beginning to get into trouble with the law.
Oh, Lord. Bitch,
My parents had split when I was around 12 or so, and I got even more lost in the shuffle. I saw all the rich kids at school with their fancy polo shirts and Guess jeans, and I fantasized about having the same things. I began shoplifting what I wanted and wearing it to school. This drew the ire of those same kids who knew better than I did that I in their little club. Shoplifting grew into other petty crimes. Others took note, and I attracted like-minded kids to me. Our bad habits rubbed off on each other, and we all became the crew of pot-smoking juvenile delinquents everyone had expected us to become. I would be passed between each parent like a joint at a party. Anytime I'd be picked up by the cops, I'd be pawned off on the other parent. Neither of them paid me any attention while they had me. I was left on my own to provide for myself. In addition to material things like clothes, I'd also lift stuff like deodorant and cologne. I taught myself how to better groom myself, and I'd eventually shake the reputation as the stinky kid.
Hell yeah.
By then, I was already well known as a thug and stoner. I embraced this moniker with all my heart and leaned into it as far as possible. Like the other losers that I hung out with, I became a dropout. I was a 17-year-old senior at the time. I was called to the office, not an unusual thing for me, and I was told that I wasn't going to graduate. It was a big shock. Although I did my fair share of ditching class, I always did my work when I was there. To my knowledge, my grades were decent, but after seeing them all combined, I realized that I was wrong. I put up a bold front and pretended I didn't care, but below the surface, I felt devastated. And finally, I was officially the loser everyone always thought that I was. And the next day, I just slept until noon. My parents didn't notice until a lot later, which by then was far too late. I wasn't the first to drop out after all. My mom had done the same thing when she got pregnant with me at 16, and they both put up this big production pretending like they cared, but it was forgotten about within days. Without anything to occupy my days, I started spending all my time with my friends. It was just one long episode of drinking, smoking, and getting in trouble. I was dealing a little pot and acid by then and had no need to work. I wouldn't have passed the drug test even if I wanted to. I was happy wasting my time at the abandoned gas station that we had made our little hang-up, and the business always had been in a bad location, off to itself in a sort of industrial area. On the other hand, it was perfect for us. We were able to keep some scavenged furniture there to lounge around on, and a few of us would crash there on occasion. In the 5 years that we hung out there, the cops never bothered us once. For kids with screwed-up home lives, it was a paradise on Earth, an idyllic getaway from the turmoil of the outside world. It was one of those lazy days which we found ourselves feeling restless and bored. Several ideas were brought forth and discussed until we chose the best one. It was to be an exploration of another nearby building. The Semco building once housed 2 stories of offices and was the headquarters of Semco Shipping until 1988. The company went into bankruptcy that same year and the building was abandoned. At the time, it was owned by the city and would occasionally host a flea market there. The flea market never got anywhere, but some vendors were said to still store items in the building. Our 2 goals were to steal anything we deemed as valuable and to explore. It would be a virgin territory. That day, there were 3 of us. We loaded a few flashlights and sodas into a backpack and headed out. If we made a big score, the short distance between the buildings wouldn't make carrying our haul much of a chore, but we had to get in first. We got lucky. We found an unlocked window and climbed in. I suggested that we stay together. We checked door after door until we came to the flea market area. The stories just turned out to be BS. The only thing that remained was some folded tables along the walls and a refrigerator. I checked the refrigerator in the vain hope someone had left some beer behind or something, and all I found was a very expired jug of milk from the year before. I didn't dare open it, and something struck me though. The refrigerator was still running. Now, keep the jokes to yourself, please. Now, if so, the electricity must be... I told one of the guys to flip the switch on the wall, and the lights came on. And this would make our search safer and much easier for sure. From the market area, we went from office to office. Most, if not all, were empty save for a desk or table. The conference rooms were the same. We took the stairs to the second floor. Without any people in the building, an eerie feeling hung in the air. The hum of the fluorescent fixtures was almost deafening. As I stepped out onto the second floor, the feeling changed into one of dread. I wasn't sure why, but something inside me was urging me to leave. I could see no reason to, and therefore I disregarded my gut and carried on.
Now why the hell would you do
The
that,
overall
don't you?
condition of the upper floor was far more dilapidated than the first. The last residents of the building looked to have been using the space for storage. The first two rooms we encountered were large conference spaces packed with folding chairs and tables. The largest of the two also housed several old and yellowed computers. Even in 1993, when this took place, they were clearly outdated. I stayed behind and dug through the rooms in search of something of value, while the other two went ahead. I was flipping over tables when I heard my name.
Oh boy.
I walked down the hall a few offices when I saw my two friends looking down at something. I walked into the office and one of them pointed down. On the floor, there was a sleeping bag and some worn-out blankets. I thought nothing of it. So what? Some homeless guy's been sleeping up here. That's hardly anything unknown.
Yeah, okay.
We haven't found more stuff like this. For all we know, it's the Hilton for the homeless. My friend huffed and told me to look again. This time, I noticed a torn-up t-shirt and bra just a few feet away, and there were a pair of jeans that looked to belong to a small female. None of this was odd either. However, the rust-colored stains on the crotch and legs were. I could only guess that they were blood. We were speculating about their possible cause when the building went pitch black. I took off my pack and dug around for my flashlight until I located it. I turned it on and scanned the room, and the others did the same. I guess it was a trip breaker or fuse or something. Either way was likely, and the other two agreed but brought up how strange the timing was.
Right.
I chuckled and recommended that we try the fuse box. We had just stepped out into the hall when the screaming started.
Oh, Lord.
It seemed to be coming from a few offices away. We stared at each other, eyes as big as saucers, shocked at the noise. Around the second passed and the screaming began again, but this time the person said, "Help me." It was obviously a woman and she sounded terrified and desperate. And being the stupid kid I was, I panicked and ran, my companions following close behind me, and the screams continued all the way to the exit, almost taunting us. We made our way down the stairs and out the way we came in less than a minute. Outside, a sense of relief washed over me. It was like I'd just awakened from a terrible nightmare. We returned to the gas station and discussed what had just happened. Calling the cops was suggested, but one of the guys reminded the others that we were high, and knowing the police as well as we did, they'd be more than likely to lock us up than check it out. There was also the possibility that we'd be blamed for what happened if they find anything. It just didn't seem worth it at the time, so we made a pact to never discuss it again. To my knowledge, this is the first time anyone but my wife has heard this story. Months would pass and actually go on to become years. One of the guys moved on to bigger crimes and ultimately got life for killing a couple during a home invasion. The other guy moved off to Chicago in his early 20s. I have no idea what became of him. As for myself, I finally got things on track. I quit drinking and getting high at 22. I got my GED about the same time and then attended a college in Florida. My interest in the unknown drove me to become an archaeologist, believe it or not, and now I work for the state. Anytime a bone or artifact is found on a construction site, I'm one of the people that goes in and checks it out. Like I mentioned earlier, my life has turned out quite well, and I have no regrets but that one. Running away that day has haunted me ever since. I can't be sure if it wasn't somebody trying to scare us, but at least in my drug-out mind, it seemed real. A few years later, the building was demolished and there were rumors of a skull being found, but they could just be that, rumors. It's impossible to know unless I start asking questions, and I've thought about it, but after all this time, it's probably best that things stay buried.
Right.
This story is going to have to serve as my confession. I was a coward and ran away as a woman begged for help. That's a fact.
Right, fucking
But I hope, now that the truth is out in the open, that the sins of my past won't follow me to my grave.
Hell yeah.
Hey, it's me, your dry skin. I know I can be challenging, but I'm deeper than what you see. I'm craving something we're missing.
I was craving something too, huh?
In the fall of 2015, I was a freshman at a small Texas college popular for its viticulture program.
Yeah.
Viticulture, for those unaware, is the science of cultivating and harvesting grapes for the sole purpose of winemaking. Many don't realize Texas has a thriving winemaking industry. The Spanish, who first brought the practice to this part of the New World, are said to have been producing wines in the El Paso area as far back as the 1650s.
Oh.
By 2019, the state ranked as the 5th largest wine-producing state in the country. I had become interested in the business in my teens after seeing a documentary chronicling the French side of the market. Then, a few years later, my passion was rekindled after my first taste at a New Year's party. The complex flavor coming from something so apparently simple as this, it blew my mind. I became obsessed with knowing how it was done, and that's how I ended up at this school. If I wanted, I could go on about wine all day, but that's not why I'm here. Instead, my purpose is to share a scary incident that I had and maybe teach an important lesson in the process. This story actually begins the summer before I went away. As soon as I received the formal notification that I was accepted, my parents started making plans. They had dreamed of traveling like when they were young, and with me out of the house, they prepared for a long worldwide trip. I had no objections. I probably should have thought a little more about it before giving approval, though. And not too long before I wanted to leave, I asked what day they wanted me to arrive for the Christmas holiday. They both looked at me and laughed. I was confused and asked what was going on. That moment would be the first time I discovered just how vile they truly were. As unknown to me, they fully intended to travel the world indefinitely. And this was a big shock. My parents were my only family, and without them I would have to celebrate everything alone. I felt completely abandoned. I said this, but was given a nonchalant brush-off of, just go stay with a friend or something. When I reminded them that I had no friends left in the area, they told me that I was being dramatic and just kind of wandered off. And this event only served to further damage the already weak relationship that there had been between us for quite some time. After all the problems with my parents, I was happy when it came time to leave. They couldn't get away fast enough in my mind. I was dropped off and left with little more than a short good luck. And that would be the last time that I'd set eyes on them for 4 years until they showed up for my graduation, unannounced. Without knowing when I'd see my family again, I had no other choice but to make a new one of my own. I began by attempting to befriend my roommate, Shelby, but she wasn't interested. She had come from an affluent Houston suburb. Her neighbors were ex-presidents and billionaires, and I had no hope of ever matching her standards. We kept away from each other for the most part and had very few arguments. I would do better as the semester continued. Classes kept me occupied, and the few friends I had made were kind to me. Many of those I was introduced to early on were foreign students from countries like Nigeria. Among them was Benjamin. He had been sent to America to get a business degree. He was very intelligent and nice, yet most of the other Nigerians didn't like him, and I soon discovered why. On occasions, when I was speaking to other people, he would stand across the room and just kind of stare coldly. His expression made my skin crawl, and I began to feel his icy gaze everywhere I went. Even when I couldn't see him, I just kind of knew he was there. Yet if he passed close by you, he'd say hello and strike up a regular, friendly conversation. I remained on friendly terms with him, even though I often felt uneasy in his presence. The Christmas holiday soon arrived, and I found myself alone in the dorms along with many of the other foreign students. Those of us who celebrated the holiday got together on Christmas Eve and had a party. Benjamin was one of those who attended. I engaged in the holiday spirit and invited him in to join me. The other students had been shunning him, I guess. I understood why, but it was Christmas after all. Nobody should be alone. Benjamin was his normal, kind self, and we joined along with the remaining students and had a great time. Festivities would wind down at about 2 a.m. when everyone staggered back to their rooms. Christmas Day was relatively quiet. Those who could spent the day with friends in town. I cuddled up with a book and watched a few movies. That night, the temperatures dropped well below freezing. According to the radio, many cities in the northern area of the state were without power. We have been fortunate not to experience this. Things remained quiet into the next day, and I had stayed in my room until around dinner time when I got a major craving for pizza. I assumed at least a few other students would want some too. I came across about 15 students in the common room and asked if any of them wanted to chip in, and 6 of them said yes. We were putting together the order when the power went off. Someone went to check the extent of the outage and found that it was only in the school. A low grumbling began among some of those present. A few were afraid that we were going to freeze to death, although I doubted this was going to happen. It was a possibility, I guess. We'd been left to our own devices. The staff would be gone until the new year, and that included anyone capable of fixing the electricity. By now, the room was full. A loud argument broke out, and the whole situation became a giant racket. And out of nowhere, Benjamin spoke up and volunteered to fix the problem. He was confident that it was probably a blown fuse or something, and it wouldn't take a minute to replace. A few of us were skeptical, but he managed to convince us. He seemed to know what he was talking about. And now that we had a plan, Benjamin asked if a few of us would join him to look for the fuses. I volunteered along with 3 others. We spent the better part of an hour just looking for the box. The job was made all that much harder because we were using the lights on our cell phones. Benjamin opened the cover and confirmed the fuse was the culprit. Now, the search began for the fuses. This was a much easier undertaking. There was a cabinet stocked with about 5 and it was only a few feet away. Even in the darkness of the room, Benjamin seemed to gleam with pride, and this was his chance to show the others, especially his fellow Nigerians, that he had something beneficial to provide to them. I can only speculate this was his original motivation for volunteering in the first place, which is why what was to come next was that much sadder. Now armed with all we needed, Benjamin asked me to shine my light into the fuse box. I stood off to the side and focused the beam directly on his hands as he worked. Maybe a minute had passed by when someone behind me asked me a question. I turned my head slightly toward them to answer and heard a pop. The pop was followed by a low humming noise. When I looked back at Benjamin, his body had taken on a tight, upright stance, and his jaw was clenched and rigid. The humming got gradually louder until a second louder pop happened. At this point, Benjamin limply dropped to the floor and lay there silent. I was initially reluctant to touch him out of fear of being shocked myself, but I overcame it and checked for a pulse. I was unable to find one, and I just immediately began giving him CPR and did for several minutes before someone suggested that we just call 911. I've been so freaked out that I'd just completely forgotten. It took about 15 minutes for the paramedics to find us, but they had Benjamin picked up and away quickly once they had. The blackout took a backseat after that. 10 or so of us packed into the 2 cars available and hurried to the hospital, arriving within minutes of Benjamin. We all waited patiently for over an hour for news of his condition, and when it finally came in, it was not the result we'd hoped for. Despite working on him for a long time, the doctors were unable to restart his heart. The electricity had done just too much damage, apparently, and more than a few tears were shed, even among those who apparently disliked him. And the ride back was quiet. Upon returning, we realized our power problem still existed. Nobody was willing to risk their lives to fix it, though. I doubted any of us had a clue about how to do it anyway. I took the initiative and called a few electricians listed on Google. One of them was willing to come out and help us, and he arrived within the hour and had the lights back on before sunrise. The rest of the break went off without any trouble. The staff were all stunned about what we had to deal with in their absence. And because of that year's tragedy, from then on, a few members of staff were required to remain on campus during the holiday breaks in case of complications like the one we had. Some other good things would also come from this. Benjamin was heralded as a hero, sacrificing his life for the well-being of the students and giving him the respect that he lacked in life. His father was quoted as saying, his son knew little to nothing about electricity. An example of their bravery and selflessness. The irony was not lost on me, but I held my tongue. After all, I think Benjamin would have been happy to know that he'd finally won his fellow Nigerians' respect. There had been a few instances where I questioned if I may have been complicit in his death, and perhaps I moved the light and this caused the accident, but considering Benjamin probably had no clue what he was doing, I try to put such thoughts out of my mind. Now, to wrap this up, I thought I'd mention that my remaining years at the college were far less dramatic. My second year, I had a friend with an amazing family that allowed me to share the holidays with them, and I've come to regard them as much more as family than my real parents ever had been. I graduated in 2019 and was ready to begin a job with a small Texas winery until the pandemic came around. My plans were put on hold for over an entire year, but I'm pleased to say that the family that owned the winery called me as soon as things opened back up and renewed their offer. It's been an amazing job so far. I may go as far as saying that I'm slowly becoming a Texan. The land here is breathtaking, and when compared with Vermont, the weather is a lot better, minus the occasional freak ice storm. And that's it for me. I hope you learn from my experience and think twice before messing with things you don't really understand. A force such as electricity is nothing to be playing with. Just please be careful when doing it yourself. If you ever feel like you're out of your depth, don't hesitate to call for help. There isn't a day that doesn't go by that I don't wish 19-year-old me would have done just that. Click the join button to become a member today for exclusive content.
What the hell?
I've read several encounters like mine here. Even though my version ends the same way as most, I've decided to include it anyway. I don't think my story is any more special or important than others. I simply want people to see how common incidents of this kind really are. Most people I talk to don't seem to understand just how easily they can become a victim of a crime. My hope is that if my story is added to the many others on the internet, maybe just a few will grasp the seriousness of the crime problem in America and prepare themselves. To provide a bit of context, I was 15 when this happened. As of today, I'm 24. Now back then, my parents were very reluctant to allow me any freedoms. Other kids my age already had phones and went to concerts. Going back as young as 13, I've been bugging them to let me stay at home alone. Most of my babysitters weren't much older than me, and it was embarrassing and unnecessary. Every year, I kept expecting them to ease up, but they wouldn't or couldn't, and by 15, I'd had enough. There was no reasonable excuse for me to have a babysitter, and it all came to a head when they were discussing their anniversary. Every year, they would go out and have a meal to celebrate. No problem there. I was lucky to have a stable home life. However, when the subject of a babysitter was brought up, I exploded. I was fed up. I was not a baby. I could cook for myself, do my own laundry, and wake up for school without being told. Their coddling of me was over. I made it clear that I was grown up, and the babysitter crap was over once and for all. Neither of them said anything at first. They looked at one another briefly, and my father turned to me and smiled. "Okay, I agree. It's time for you to become a man. No more babysitters." I was unprepared for it and tried not to let my shock show. I was finally going to get the respect that I deserved, and I immediately began planning for the first night alone. I had considered inviting one of my friends over to celebrate with me, but I changed my mind when the subject of chaperones came up. It looked like things weren't going to be as I'd hoped, but I wasn't going to let one small setback ruin my victory. Everything was looking great until the news began scaremongering about an unexpected storm. My parents discussed canceling their dinner. It was beginning to look like the entire universe was conspiring against me. I did my best to talk them out of it, but it remained unclear what they were planning until the day of their anniversary itself. That morning, the weatherman said that it was looking as if though the storm wasn't going to be as bad as they had thought. This was the last-minute reprieve that I had been praying for. The dinner date was back on, and I was about to get the whole evening to myself. That afternoon seemed like it dragged on forever. I sat in my room playing games and impatiently checking the clock every few minutes, and I was only able to calm down when the sun set. It would only be a few short hours from there. Just before 7 p.m., the moment arrived. I watched with a mix of relief and excitement as they drove away into the night. I ran back to my bedroom and dropped down in front of my TV. My door was left wide open, probably for the first time in 10 years or more. Placed around me was all my favorite snacks and a 3-liter of Mountain Dew. I set aside my headphones and cranked up the TV. It was a young man's dream. Not really different than my regular life, but at least now I was sure nobody would be there to complain about the noise or my foul mouth. I unpaused my game and let myself go. The rain had started falling even more before my parents left, but as the evening passed, it grew worse and worse. I noticed it in the background, but I was enjoying myself too much to really care. I was getting close to the end of the game. I think it was Assassin's Creed or something, when suddenly, everything went black. Now, stuff like this had happened before, but it didn't last more than a minute. I waited, but the power stayed off. I felt around in the dark until I found my iPhone, and I used the light to see my way around. Briefly, I thought about calling my parents, but I decided to leave that as a last resort. The power would probably be back on soon anyway. While I waited, I stared out at the rain. It was pouring down like a waterfall. I guess I got lost in the beauty of it. A sudden banging on the front door knocked me out of my trance. I looked out to see if it was maybe my parents. There was a small chance that one of them didn't have their keys in that moment and couldn't get in since I'd locked the door. My view was blocked by some bushes, so I couldn't be sure without actually going to the door. The light from my phone was less than ideal, but I made it to the door without much trouble. I peered over the edge of the door's little window. A man I didn't recognize was standing on the porch. Nothing about his looks alarmed me, but I was reluctant to open it. I yelled at him through the door. I asked him what he wanted, and he said that his car had broken down a ways down the road, and he needed to use the phone. Now, even back then, most people had some type of cell phone. I was a little suspicious of his claims, so I told him we didn't have a home phone. When he asked if I had one, I just lied and denied it. He remained calm this whole time, and when he asked for a towel, I said all right. I ran to the bathroom as quickly as I could and returned with one, and this was my mistake. I let him take advantage of my compassion, and it almost cost me my life. I tried to pass him the towel and close the door quickly, but he grabbed my hand the second that I stuck it out. I was able to jerk my hand away, but he was already pushing his way inside. I fought against his weight as long as I could. I started to feel myself losing strength. I remembered that I had a deadbolt on my closet door. I had put it on a year prior when I found my mom digging through my things. I was the only one with the key, and there was no way anyone was going to find the hiding place. I took a big breath and ran as fast as possible for my room. I was inside and locked in the closet in less than 5 seconds. My fingers were already dialing 911 even before I was turning the bolt. The voice of the operator instantly gave me a boost of confidence. I told her my problem as quietly as I could. I was well aware that a grown man could get through the flimsy closet door with enough effort. The lock was only a way to slow him down long enough for the police to arrive. The operator did a great job of keeping me calm. I could hear the man rummaging through the house, breaking things as he searched for me. Our house wasn't that big, and soon enough, I heard him enter my room. I was too scared to say anything. I could hear his breathing as he approached the closet door. He jiggled the knob, but the door held fast, and he let out a sigh and spoke. I know you're in there. I don't want to hurt you. Just come out now. I won't hurt you. I was frozen still. I didn't dare even breathe. Okay, kid. I'm sick of these games. I'm gonna get something to break down this door. And then, you're gonna be sorry.
I would have cried.
All of a sudden, the operator's voice blared out on the phone, asking if I was still on the line. I panicked and blurted out that I had called the cops and they were on their way. The man stayed quiet for a moment and then called me a little liar. I assumed this was because I had lied about not having a phone. He stood silently outside for a while, but after around a minute, I heard him walk out of the room and down the hall. I stayed where I was for the time being. There was no way I'd be tricked a second time. Maybe 30 seconds later or so, the 911 operator let me know that the cops had arrived. Not long after that, an officer came to the door and told me that it was safe to come out. A wave of relief washed over me as I stepped from that closet, and it would be short-lived though. I was still in my room talking to the cop when I heard the shrill screeching of my mother coming from outside. In that moment, I almost regretted saving myself. She came running into my room crying out her baby and asking if her baby was okay. The police told her what had happened and she broke out into her, "I knew that we shouldn't left you alone" speech. My dad stayed out in the hall staring at me with a disapproving look on his face, and I knew in that moment that I would never have a second to myself again. And this turned out to be exactly what happened. After that night, I was never allowed to be home alone again. And now, I had to go everywhere with them if one couldn't stay behind to protect me. And this continued even after I got a job a year later, which they strongly disapproved of, by the way. I was nearing my final year in high school and legally a man in some societies, but the iron grip remained tight. All this restrictive treatment came to its expected climax when I was 17. I had foolishly assumed the overbearing parenting would finally begin to let up, but I was wrong. And one day, I was told to get ready to go out because my parents both had to be present for something. The reason isn't important. I made it clear that I had to work in a few hours and needed to get some last-minute things done. My mom said she didn't care. I was too irresponsible to be at home by myself, and my dad just stood by silently as he always had. This was the moment that I realized what had really been going on. This hadn't been about my safety. This is all because I had made one stupid mistake, and it was going to haunt me until I finally put a stop to it once and for all. And looking back, I was strangely calm. I looked my mother straight in the eyes and told her it was over. And she looked back at me with a confused expression. "What's over? What do you mean, it's over?" I smiled and told her that I was done with all the babying. I was far too old to be treated this way, and I was done. And she began to speak, but I stopped her, and I knew her well enough to know where she was headed. "I'm leaving. I'm moving out. I'm not a moron you think I am, and you're tyrants, and I'm done living under your rules." She seemed confused, but I was done talking. I'd had offers from friends to share apartments long before this. I was confident that I'd land on someone's couch until I could get a place of my own, and I finally got to savor the feeling of complete relief I'd had robbed from me a few years before. I called one of my friends to get me, and while I waited for him to arrive, I packed as much as I could into a backpack and just left. As I walked out, I looked back one last time. I hated those people for what they had done. They stood ashen-faced, I guess you could say, still shell-shocked about what had just happened. And for me, it was the best day of my life. And from then on, I stayed with friends until I got old enough to get a lease. I continued going to school during all of this. I graduated and went on to college, where I got a degree in secondary education. Although I don't hate my parents like I used to, I don't miss their condescending and overbearing rules one bit. In spite of all the family stuff, I hope I've made my point clear. I may even create a subreddit for posting these types of weird stories sometime soon. And once I think of a name and set it up, I'll make an update to share the information. I want it to be a place people can reference when discussing the crime problem with other people. I still encounter people every day who think that they're safe just because of where they live or something equally stupid. If you meet some simple-minded fool like that, show them this story and all the others before it. It may not work every time, but if it saves just one person, my goal will be achieved.
When I started my business in 2011, I chose Wix, and it was really because the aesthetic that Wix brought to my brand really
The roots of my trouble go way back to late 2019. I had just purchased a fixer-upper house in a rundown neighborhood. This has been my only source of income for more than 20 years. I'm a flipper. I go to auctions and drive through areas in search of buildings to buy, fix up, and then sell. Hopefully, I come out the other side of the process with a profit. In late December, I bid on a nice-looking single-family two-bedroom house at auction. Oh my God! Looked forward to starting the rehab as soon as I completed and sold my current project. I just managed to get that place finished and the sale finalized when COVID-19 reared its ugly head. In spite of all the uncertainty, I decided to start plans and purchasing supplies for the new property. After I was able to get a complete picture of the dwelling, I realized the project was going to be more expensive than I had initially thought. The last tenants had almost gutted the inside and all the windows and doors were either broken or non-functional. Even before the events of the next 2 years happened, I made a hard goal to never buy property in low-income neighborhoods ever again because of this. Anyone with a pulse knows what happened in 2020 and 2021. Even after the end of lockdowns, many were still afraid, and for my part, I stuck close to home in hopes of avoiding getting sick. Once or twice I did stop in at the house to check in on it. I saw signs of squatters both times, but wasn't able to do much about it. My area would ultimately end all restrictions in spring of 21. I took this as a signal to finish my preparations and get to work on the house once and for all. My first day at the location, the roll-off container for the demo arrived and I replaced all the broken glass in the windows. The next few weeks were spent on finishing the gutting of the interior that the previous occupants had so eagerly began. As often happens in the building trades, the process took twice as long as expected. They did finally complete the work, at which time the guys doing the drywall and the electricians started bringing in their supplies. This was when I chose to replace the old and broken doorknobs and deadbolts. I had no clue who had keys to the locks that did function. There was also the chance that some valuable tools may be left behind for the sake of convenience. And it was 2 days later when I spoke to a neighbor who had just been a victim of a home invasion. The assailants had broken his wooden entry door open with a single kick. And after that discussion, I decided to upgrade all the external doors to steel. It took me an extra week, but I wouldn't have felt right knowing that I left the next owners in an unsafe living situation.
Yes, it will.
The need for better doors wasn't the only thing I'd picked up from that conversation. I had always suspected the area may be plagued with crime, but that incident confirmed it in my mind. Although I wouldn't choose to live in that neighborhood, I am very aware not everyone has as many options as I do. No matter a person's income or class, I believe everyone has a right to feel safe in their own home. It's a no-brainer as far as I'm concerned. I began searching for the best-looking doorknobs and deadbolts that I could afford. I contacted a contractor I'm friends with, and he made me a good deal on some amazing European locks. When they arrived, I began putting them in the doors. However, upon reaching the back door, I noticed I didn't have the right keys for that particular lock. I called up that same contractor, and they promised to overnight me a new deadbolt, but it wasn't the reason I decided to spend the night. I noticed a major problem with the drywall, and the head of the drywall crew guy was supposed to show up early the next morning to discuss it. I laid a sleeping bag and a wool blanket on the master bedroom floor and set my oil lamp up for light if I needed it. I could sleep through anything, so I was confident the night would be quiet and uneventful.
Yeah, right, bitch.
I couldn't have been asleep that long when I heard a banging coming from the kitchen. I sat up and listened for it again. Mere seconds later, it repeated. I felt around for my jeans and put them on. I stood up and walked carefully towards the kitchen. As I got closer, I could hear two voices whispering outside. In the kitchen, the voices got clearer. One belonged to a male and the other was almost surely a female, although I couldn't be sure. A light was illuminating two figures standing at the door. They were looking down at the doorknob and appeared to be trying to break in. I was just a few feet from the door when it burst open, and the two figures spilled inside. The pair ran right into me, and the look of shock on their faces was priceless. It took the guy a moment to compute what was happening. I started laughing and was beginning to say something when he jumped on me. In the process, he dropped the light on the floor and turned off. We leaned against each other in complete darkness. I was holding my own, but the possibility that the woman could join in against me had me very concerned. He and I continued fighting for around 20 seconds, neither man getting power over the other, when I landed a lucky nut shot on him. I felt his body give way and I took control. I landed one decent shot across his face, but slipped and fell face first forward. He must have been done. I was getting up when I heard him scooting out the door, followed closely by the female. I slammed the door behind them and pulled a nearby chair over and wedged it under the knob.
As you should, bitch.
I looked out to see if they were looking around, waiting to come back, but I didn't see any sign of them. The odds were, they were halfway across the neighborhood.
They are.
I felt safe enough to feel my way back to the bedroom and retrieve my phone. I used the screen to find some matches to light my lamp. For the first time, I could see almost everything around me. It was a good feeling. I took a moment to relax and I called 911. I let the dispatcher know what had happened, and a few minutes later the cops arrived with an ambulance. The paramedics checked me out while I filled the police in on the situation. I got the okay and the cops left. They said if they came up with anything they'd contact me, and it was probably just some squatters. And I'm left to assume that they never did find anything out. Despite being a little shaken up, I was able to get a few hours of rest before the drywall guy showed up. We got our problem resolved, and his guys were able to complete their work by the end of that month. The new lock arrived just as promised late that afternoon, and I got that task finished by dark. After another 2 or 3 months, the rehab was done, and the house sold a few weeks later. Like I said, my days of flipping in dangerous neighborhoods is over. I wish less fortunate people had better options, but I'm just one man. I did as much as I could think of, and it's out of my hands now. All I can do is bid them good luck. Hey friends, thanks for listening. Click that notification.
Let's see what else we got up in here. Bro, Jay Sean's so hour, Jay Sean. Oh my gosh. My mom and these damn Walmart orders. Ew. Bitch ass nigga. Oh. Rewards balance $0. What? Fuck that goddamn chair. Bitch. Uh, I'ma have to go figure out. My dog saved me. Nah, thank you. I'm good, cause my dog would not save me. I'll tell you that now. That bitch would not save me. Oh. Good evening, United Airlines passengers.
Hey friends, as you might have noticed, I've recently advertised a few products on the basis that they'd make great holiday gifts for your nearest and dearest. But how about treating yourself to a little gift this year? If you're here, I'm guessing you love listening to great stories, so for this episode, I'm partnering with Audible to bring you even more of the content you love. Audible is home to the most riveting stories, some of which are narrated by big names like Kevin Hart, Kerry Washington, or Ethan Hawke.
I don't know who those are.
There is also a huge selection of genres to choose from, including celebrity memoirs, wellness books, and business guides. But take it from me, the selection of superbly narrated, masterfully written horror stories are what keeps me renewing my subscription. Audible members can choose one free title a month to keep forever, meaning the membership fees basically pay for themselves, and the platform serves as a great way to discover your new favorite authors and stories. Obviously, an Audible membership would make a great gift for someone this holiday season. But when it comes to those long holiday journeys and woozy hungover mornings, nothing takes the edge off like a good story. All you have to do is head over to audible.com/letsreadyt or text Let's Read YT to 500-500 and you can get a free 30-day trial. For a fact, Audible will be the right fit for you. This is a story that I have only told my wife about and the guys who served with me at the time it happened. Just for future reference, audience, if you ever come across someone who's been in the military and they are always talking about war battles and combat, they're lying. You don't really talk about those things with civilians. Maybe close family, a spouse, but mainly you only talk to the guys you serve with about it, if at all, really. I won't give every single solid detail as far as the city and exactly where, but you'll get enough. So here I was, a college dropout, just turned 20 years old, only been in the Marine Corps for about 18 months, and I was already 4 months deep into my first combat deployment in Iraq. My job? 0331 Infantry Machine Gunner. We were doing weapons cache sweep along the Euphrates River because Al-Qaeda likes to store weapons along the banks and coasts of rivers. We're on the patrol, metal detector in hand, sweeping for weapons caches while also providing security when the metal detector goes off. The Marine holding it stops.
Bitch, please shut the fuck up. Ow! Fuck. Is there anybody even in here right now? I'm just curious. I don't think there's anybody in here. I don't know how to use extreme bitrate that much. Sorry, y'all. I'm just gonna